Good afternoon, everyone. This is Stephen Howard. I'm IDC's National Outreach Director, and I just want to welcome all of you to this very special webinar we have with a group of people who've dedicated much of their lives to supporting the historic Christian communities of the Middle East. With us this afternoon, we have many great distinguished guests. First off, we have Acting Administrator John Barsa of Usaid. We have Toufic, Baaklini, the President of In Defense of Christians. We have Samah Norquist, who is the Senior Advisor for Religious Freedom and Religious Pluralism in the region. And we have Rana, who's a co-founder of the Shlama Foundation, and they do on-the-ground programming to help communities that have survived ISIS. Now we have a great hour of content set up for everyone out there. Just to give everyone on the call an outline of how we're going to proceed. We're going to start off with a brief welcome from IDC President Toufic Baaklini. Then we'll transition over to the Acting Administrator who has some remarks on this subject. Then I myself will facilitate a Q&A with Mrs. Norquist and Mrs. Abro to talk about their partnership in Iraq. We'll then open it up for an audience Q&A, and then we'll close it out again with remarks from IDC's President. So just to kick things off, I'd like to invite our President of In Defense of Christians, Toufic Baaklini, to offer some remarks.
Thank you, Stephen. And I want to thank first the team from Usaid, and especially our new Acting Administrator, John Barsa, and Usaid Senior Advisor, Samah Norquist, for your public service and everything that you're doing to help the religious communities in the Middle East. I would also like to thank Rana Abro for serving the Iraqi Christian communities that are struggling from the recovery of genocide in Iraq. As you well know, I mean, we've been working with this administration. The Trump administration has been extremely helpful. A little over 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, the Vice President announced during our summit in 2017 that the Iraqis the Christian Iraqis would start receiving direct aid. And that was a major policy, and we thank the President and the Vice President for their support for the Christians in the Middle East and other minorities as well. As you know, the Christians are the indigenous people in the Middle East, and what they bring a lot of, if you want, a lot of culture, education, and we would always fight for them to stay in their own land, and because they are the originals that's where Christianity started. It started in the Middle East, and not that many people used to know about this before we started talking about it in defense of Christians. So we want to support our communities throughout the Middle East, and we want to make sure we don't want ISIS to win, and I think we're fighting the fight, and we have support from as I said, from the President and now with Usaid. And we're working with Usaid to provide development assistance to our communities and all over the Middle East, especially right now in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. And we help them in so many ways. We want them to be safe. We want them to be treated equally. And this is what we work for. We want them to stay in their land. That's where their roots are. And I want to thank again the Usaid, and specifically Mr. Barsa and Mrs. Norquist, for your support and help for the Christians of the Middle East. For this, I would keep it up to you, Stephen, to start the conversation with the acting administrator, Barsa.
Well, thank you very much. For everyone on the call, obviously we know that that Mr. Baaklini's dedicated his life to supporting these communities, and IDC's worked very hard, and we're just so grateful for your partnership. And so with that being said, Acting Administrator Barsa, I know that you have some remarks that you'd like to share. So I'd like to kindly invite you to unmute yourself. It seems that you're on mute, or perhaps we can even unmute you to get started here.
All right, well, Stephen, thank you so very much. And thank you to you, Toufic, Baaklini, and In Defense of Christians for all of what you do and for having me here today. I really am grateful for this opportunity and for the continued partnership between USAID and IDC in preserving religious freedom in the Middle East. Religious freedom is the root of America's foundation. If you look at the Bill of Rights in our Constitution, you'll see that the very first line references religious freedom. This freedom, what we often call our first freedom, is not only a deep-seated American value, but also a universal human right. In many parts of the world today, communities are denied the freedom to exercise this human right. People cannot openly practice their faith due to fear of persecution and discrimination. That's why advancing religious freedom around the world is a major U.S. foreign policy priority. During his remarks at the United Nations event on religious freedom last September, President Trump stated, "As president, protecting religious freedom is one of my highest priorities and always has been." At the annual IDC Solidarity Dinner in October 2017, Vice President Mike Pence affirmed the United States' commitment to assisting persecuted religious and ethnic minority communities in the Middle East. He charged USAID with providing direct support to these communities. Today, I am reaffirming that advancing religious freedom and protecting the rights of religious minorities across the Middle East remains a top priority for USAID. Partnering with local and faith-based organizations is an important part of that commitment. The Middle East has a rich history of religious and ethnic pluralism. Different religious and ethnic communities have resided in that part of the world for centuries. In northern Iraq, Christians, Muslims, Jews, Yazidis have lived alongside one another for over 1,000 years. Lebanon remains the home of Christians, Muslims, and Druze. Christian Coptic communities in Egypt are a vital component of the Egyptian society, alongside their fellow Muslim citizens. We have a saying at USAID that diversity is the one true thing that we all have in common. Sustaining its rich diversity and working to bridge cultural divides is the best way to achieve stability in the Middle East. When the Islamic State began their brutal campaign in Syria and northern Iraq, terrorists waged genocide on Christians and other religious minority groups. They desecrated local churches and beheaded worshipers at the altar. They slaughtered Christians and Yazidis, some of the region's most ancient faith communities. These horrific acts are among some of the most extreme examples of religious intolerance in recent history. They also directly undermine the social cohesion, economic growth, peace, and security enjoyed by the region. The United States does not tolerate violence against religious minority groups, and we will continue working with regional partners to protect the freedom and cultural heritage of threatened minorities. Our mission at USAID is to advance a more stable and prosperous world. We undertake this mission not only because Americans are the most generous and compassionate people in the world, but also because we understand that American interests are closely linked to global stability and human well-being. In the Middle East, that means that our goal is to preserve the prosperity and security of the region's diverse and vibrant communities. USAID's support to religious and ethnic minorities in the region is an essential part of U.S. efforts to advance freedom of religion and foster inclusive and self-reliant societies. In the wake of the genocidal campaign by the Islamic State, USAID is helping persecuted minorities heal and restore their communities, supporting economic recovery, and working to prevent future atrocities. USAID-supported projects are helping children return to school, doctors to reopen clinics, and communities to restore essential services. USAID is also leading interagency efforts to help private investors rebuild factories in Nineveh Plains. Earlier this month, President Trump signed a historic executive order on advancing international religious freedom. As part of the order, USAID is working closely with the State Department to prioritize religious freedom and ensure that it is a central tenet of our foreign assistance strategy. Samah Norquist, who you will hear from on today's panel, will serve as the agency's lead on managing USAID's contributions to the President's executive order. Samah has tremendous experience for advancing our religious freedom work across the Middle East, and I have full confidence that she will expand that success across the agency and this role. Last year, we launched a new partnership initiative, which is an agency-wide flexible and adaptive solution to diversify our partner base. With this initiative, USAID is changing the way we do business, making it easier to work with new, often overlooked or underutilized partners. That includes local faith-based organizations who are often uniquely trusted in the communities we seek to reach and may be best placed to deliver assistance. We've had particular success using this tool to advance our goal of preserving religious freedom across the Middle East and helping people recover from ISIS's devastation. To date, USAID has awarded more than $4 million in grants to 6 Iraqi faith-based and community organizations. These groups are meeting critical local needs such as job skills training, local organization capacity building, and judicial services to survivors of genocide. This is the first time ever that USAID has partnered directly with local Iraqi organizations. In fact, a board member of one of those organizations, the Shlama Foundation, will join Samah on the panel today. Through our partnership with Shlama, we are training engineers to harness the abundant sun in Iraq to generate clean, quiet, and reliable electricity that will benefit survivors of ISIS genocide. We are fostering self-reliance by making them less dependent on the government for electricity. Because of the success with partners like Shlama in northern Iraq, we're looking for ways to expand similar programming and grow our partnerships with civil society groups and faith-based organizations across the region, including Lebanon. As we do that, we will continue to rely on groups like In Defense of Christians. We cannot do the work we do without your tireless advocacy and activism. The fact that the Vice President participated in IDC's annual dinner last year is a testament to the appreciation we all have for the value that IDC brings in protecting and preserving religious minorities, particularly in the Middle East. The work you do is extremely important in supporting U.S. foreign policy, ensuring that we safeguard the rights of Christians, Yazidis, and other communities vulnerable to violence, marginalization, and persecution. Thank you so very much for all of this work. Thank you again for having me, and I look forward to hearing about the discussion that follows, even though I can't participate firsthand. So again, thank you for all you do.
Well, Acting Administrator, we're incredibly grateful to you for your time and your commitment to this issue. And we just want to extend that thanks, of course, to Mrs. Norquist. And so without further ado, I'm actually going to transition us back to our Q&A. We have 2 excellent panel. Oh, yes, Acting Administrator?
No, it does waving goodbye. All right,
Oh,
I gotta
thank
go.
you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. All right, take care.
We're going to transition over to our Q&A now. And we have 2 strong female leaders for religious pluralism and for religious freedom, and especially 2 women who've done a great deal to support the historic Christian communities of the Middle East. So our first speaker, we have Samah Norquist, who is the Senior Advisor for Religious Freedom and Pluralism in the Middle East at USAID. And then our second speaker, we have Rana Abro, who is the co-founder of the Shlama Foundation. And so what I'm going to do is actually, for about the next 20 minutes, I have some questions for each of them, and then we're going to open it up to our audience, to those 45 of you on the call, and many more watching on Facebook, for questions as well. And so just to kick things off, I'm actually going to start with Samah with USAID, and I wanted just to first of all ask if you could kindly just introduce yourself and share about your work with religious freedom and religious pluralism in the Middle East.
Sure, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for the opportunity, Toufic. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to join you today and be part of this important work and fight the fight with you and your team since 2017. I'm really not the star here. It's actually Rana and her team that do the work on on the ground and actually work with those affected and victims of genocide in Iraq. But let me, just as you asked me to introduce myself, so I have joined USAID since 2017. Actually, on October 2017, October 16th, 2 days before the Vice President gave his remarks at the IDC dinner. So thank you, Toufic, for keeping me busy all this time. It wasn't an easy task, but it was a very, very important mission. It was the entire the Trump administration and the team that have focused on this very important issue and focusing on the victims of ISIS atrocities and genocide. And it wasn't just this administration, as many of you know, that Congress has passed a HR 390, which is a bipartisan resolution to support, provide support and mandate USAID and the State Department to support those victims of ISIS crimes and atrocities. So this is a U.S. approach to this incredible catastrophe that the region went through, and we're going to continue doing it. It's not picture perfect, and the job is not done. It's baby steps, but it is NPI, the New Partner Initiative, is one of the most important programs that we were able to initiate and promote during the past year. NPI Iraq was the launching of the NPI. So the former administrator, Mark Green, launched NPI as a mechanism at USAID. And I don't speak USAID language, but I'll try to simplify it for all your listeners. So NPI, the value and wonderful things about NPI is actually start working and developing programs with underutilized or new local partners on the ground. For that matter, in the Iraq example, we were able to do that as the first NPI program that USAID launched. And we're very, very proud of that program and with our partners. And as the administrator mentioned, it was 6 partners and Shlama is one of them. And they range from working on business, empowering business opportunities to business training to women community organizations to local organizations across northern Iraq. So we're very proud of that work, and we look forward to continuing working to do it not just in Iraq, but across the region and hopefully across the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Samah. And there's just a couple of follow-up questions I wanted to be able to ask you to learn more about your work. You know, the one question that I think that we get a lot from people, you know, here in the States, maybe that don't have connections with the region, is they want to know why it's so important for the U.S. to be engaged in promoting, you know, supporting these Christian communities and supporting religious freedom and religious pluralism in the Middle East. So can you share why it's just so important for the U.S. to be engaged on these issues?
Sure. So, so as the acting administrator Barsa mentioned, this is our first strike as Americans, right? And our leadership in advocating for human rights and protection of those religious communities around the world, not just the Middle East, is a top priority for this president and for this administration. And we continue to do that. And the president, as you all know, just signed the executive order on June 2nd, and not just for the Middle East, but across the world, because there are communities in the Middle East that are the Christians. So I don't like the term minority. I like the term communities, because in my belief that the Christians and other ethnic and religious communities that preside are part of the overall Middle East communities and populations. And without these communities, there is no Middle East, there is no culture, there's no history, and there's no wonderful mosaic that existed in Iraq and in Syria and in Lebanon and Egypt and all across the region. So that's why in this case, ISIS has committed genocide. And it was recognized as genocide, not just by this administration, but actually started by the Obama administration with Secretary Kerry. So the work continued to carry on and to focus on helping and partnering with groups on the ground that actually went through those atrocity, and they understand what the needs are, rather than us sitting behind desks and telling people what they need. It's actually the opportunity for us to partner with groups like Shlama, who Rana will speak about their work shortly. It's very important for us because those are the people in the groups, those are the people that know what the needs are and what needs to be done and how to do it. Why it's important, it's in the Middle East because those are the communities, but it's also not limited to the Middle East, it's across the world as well. Thank you.
Appreciate that very much. And Samah, you said a lot of wonderful things about the Shlama Foundation and the work that Rana's doing. One last question before we transition over to her. Can you just talk about the importance of your work with the Shlama Foundation and what it means to you yourself and then also to the agency?
So in the Usaid and the American government is no different than any other bureaucracy or any government bureaucracy that we know around the world. Sometimes it's for good reasons and sometimes it's just for painful reasons. So it's very important to work with groups like Shlama because it allows us to diversify our partnership, find new partners and competitive partners that can bring new ideas and new ways of doing business, and also partner with faith-based organizations, which is one of the most essential things for us as we're doing and as we're fighting for religious freedom. There are no better than faith-based organizations that work with the community, that has the trust of their own communities, and that are the centers of these communities in the Middle East, whether it's in Iraq or other places. The objective of this administration is religious freedom, and it's making sure that these communities, their homes are still preserved and they continue to exist in the Middle East. And without those organizations and their presence and giving them the empowerment to stay and continue building and rebuilding, that's the way that we ensure that these organizations continue to be there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to switch over to Rana, and then after our brief conversation with her, we'll open it up to our call participants for a Q&A with Samah and with Rana. So our next speaker here is Rana Abro, who's the co-founder of the Shlama Foundation. And so Rana, just to start things off here, can you just introduce yourself, tell us about your work founding the foundation, and as well as what your organization is trying to accomplish, what your main goals and objectives are.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Rana Abro. I'm one of the 5 co-founders of the Shlama Foundation. We have 5 board members and maybe about 40 other workers in the West and in Iraq, and a couple in Syria as well. And our main focus is, originally when we started, was emergency needs only. It was when ISIS came, everyone evacuated, everybody was homeless. We were only focusing on urgent needs, and we've come a really, really long way since then, nearly 6 years ago. We were founded on August 4th, 2014, in response to ISIS. At that time, there was almost no humanitarian aid in the area. There were churches and other, I don't know, maybe small organizations helping people. And what we faced was people from our own ethnic community that wanted to help, but struggled to find a trustworthy way to get funding to the people in need because Iraq was in shambles. There was not a lot of trustworthy organizations, extreme corruption. So the whole organization actually started because we wanted to create that path of sending funding, a trustworthy path, a transparent organization, and try to show people how you can be transparent in the Middle East. So that's why we started. Today we are focused a lot more on community development, more than emergency response. Even the emergency response always comes up over there. That's it for basically the intro of what we're about.
Wonderful.
We have 6 categories, 6 project categories. In addition to emergency response and community development, we also work on housing, youth activities, and education, as much as we can with security and cultural preservation.
Wonderful. And I think it'd be really helpful, you know, as President Baaklini was saying in the introduction, the reality is there are probably some people who are watching this right now on Facebook that have no idea about Christianity in Iraq. So I actually wanted just to take a step back and see if you could just introduce our viewers to your community. You know, who are you serving? What's their history, and why does it matter so much right now? Just to put all this in the context.
Okay. The people that we're serving are the Assyrian, Chaldean, Syriac people, primarily. They're an ethno-religious group, just like every other group in the Middle East. And so culture and religion overlap a lot. And that's why we use that trio name sometimes. We have an ancient ethnic history, Assyrian, Babylonian, that there is a lot of continuity since then until now of that ancient history, and it's unbelievable to explore. We also have ancient Christian history. We have churches from the 3rd, 4th century abandoned in Turkey. We have just ancient discoveries that were found by accident through destruction caused by ISIS. There is some rich, rich ancient history all throughout the Mesopotamian area that is neglected, not taken care of, not preserved properly. And there's so much that society can learn from this history. For example, Yale University has a Babylonian collection. It was just last year that they discovered that there was a severe drought during the fall of the Assyrian Empire. They also just discovered a bunch of recipes on the tablets from translating them. And I know people today are still learning how to read cuneiform so that we could interpret more from these artifacts. There's so much knowledge that is still unexplored, undiscovered, and it's at high risk. So we need to preserve these communities, we need to preserve the culture, and we need to create a safe, thriving place that is a destination for scholars and travelers. So that's why.
Now moving forward from that ancient history, obviously, as we've established, a lot of the work that we're talking about today is in response to genocide. And so you mentioned this already, but if you can kind of just walk us through again, sort of your foundation's work and just responding to this genocide and helping these communities that were targeted for extinction.
Okay, so when things first happened, Mosul was evacuated, and Mosul still needs a lot of help and attention. And people were sleeping. First, people evacuated to the nearby villages in the Nineveh Plains. And then, before we could even start our first project, nearly the entire Nineveh Plains was evacuated completely for the first time in history, empty of Christians, since the dawn of Christianity. And then the situation was in the major areas of the Kurdish region, in Ain Kawa and Dahok and other areas, huge amounts of displaced people, Yazidis, Assyrian, Chaldean, Syriac, everybody that was living in the Nineveh Plains, and they were homeless. They were sleeping outside in the park, and the weather was what it is, a little hotter than it is now in Iraq, which is 110 degrees for the people that are tuning in from Iraq right now. It was really hot. People were sleeping in churches, in banquet halls, any shelter they could find, shopping malls, abandoned buildings. It was a very terrible situation. And we were too small at that point. We just started to do huge things. And so we started with 2 very projects that really had a huge domino effect. The first one was we took a bunch of kids that had been outside in tents hadn't even arrived yet, actually. We hadn't even received tents from the UNDP yet. Nothing had arrived. There was a bunch of mattresses that came from IKEA, like 150,000 mattresses or something. Everybody had the same mattress on the floor outside. It was crazy. So we took a bunch of kids to a burger, like it's almost like the McDonald's of Iraq. It was called Dale's Burgers. Not really, it's not a chain, but it had a play place, and the kids were so happy. And we took videos and photos and listed the project, and people just were so happy to see that. People really like to see the kids happy after such a huge tragedy. So we did a lot more of those projects like that, making the kids happy. And then the other early project we did was provide medicine, because what had happened when ISIS came is people fled with all they could carry, and they were lucky if they didn't get robbed at the checkpoints trying to escape. And so people left without essential life-saving medications like heart medication, diabetes medication, things like that. So one of the earlier projects we were focused on was urgent medicine. And today, thankfully, actually 2 years later, I'll give you a milestone. About 2 years later, we did our first community development project, which people thought was insane. People thought we were insane to start rebuilding, doing reconstruction in the middle of this huge conflict. No one had started rebuilding yet. And basically there was a priest who had this empty building, and he said, I had a dream of turning this into like a community center. And so we were like, let's do it. We've raised some money now, let's do something really cool. And people were like, what are you rebuilding for? ISIS is right over there, they could just come destroy it. And we were like, no, we have to do it. There was 5 surrounding villages. And so we just added electricity, running water. We hired local contractors, which was also a huge, very important thing, because we realized that by employing the local population, we were creating jobs. And we planted some plants. We made a kids' game room, a classroom, a little library where local little organizations all were able to contribute as well by giving some of their own service. Like some people donated books and things like that. So after we did that one community center, we saw a domino effect. People that were so negative about us being able to make change also received some hope, which is going to lead me with USAID's impact as well, is people started to receive some hope that, okay, they did it, we can do it too. So a school opened for the first time after ISIS in that area. There was no school for 1 to 2 years more for many kids. They all have interrupted education now. So basically, a lot of other things started opening, and then that was the first milestone to start on the development path where rebuilding began. More organizations were coming, international organizations, French, Hungarian, American. So that's that. And I don't know if you have another question or if I should start with USAID.
Well, you know, as a matter of fact, there's one last question I had for you, Rana, and then what we're going to do is we're going to open it up to the attendees on the call so that they can ask questions to both you and Samah. So if you're an attendee on the call, if you're watching, get your question ready, start typing it in the chat box. We just, of course, ask that you keep the questions brief and polite. But the last question that I wanted to ask you, Rana, was just, can you talk about your partnership with USAID and what that has meant for the Shlama Foundation and for your organization's mission?
Yes, so USAID's entry into Iraq, I feel like was not as noticed as maybe these smaller grants are by the local community. So USAID started much before the MPI grant, and they were working with larger organizations. But the issue with that was the larger organizations were not like embedded within the local villages and all the little things like that, but they were doing great work nonetheless. So when the MPI grant came out, organizations like us and others that speak the language and are with the local population, people started to see USAID's presence. So I just want to point that out, that they were there before the MPI grant doing a lot of work. And being a partner with them helped me see a lot of really incredible things that are essential to a place in the Middle East. For example, female empowerment. That is one of USAID's principles. And it's something that they encouraged with us, even though we believe in it as well. We have many female volunteers. Their push made us elevate ourselves as well. And diversity. It was very important to them to demonstrate our diversity. and creating jobs and sustainability. They didn't want us to just create a project and leave it, and that's it. We do the work and we're done. But they wanted us to create a project that kept feeding the community and kept going on its own after we were done. So these are principles that are really important, and it's hard to see if you're not a partner what's going on, but the impact is there, and the impact is spreading, and it's really beautiful. There's a great humanitarian community in northern Iraq right now. We're all sharing a lot of victories. We're all sharing a lot of obstacles. Even after ISIS, we had to deal with Iran issues. COVID-19, we're still under lockdown in northern Iraq right now. You know, we're always sharing different obstacles with one another. And my hope is just that this can continue. We need to continue rebuilding. We need to repopulate Mosul, repopulate Sinjar. The Yazid population is largely displaced. It's a very huge tragedy. And the humanitarian work is on a really great, wonderful path. And right now, the area that's going to need attention, which is, you know, we can help with the humanitarian aspect, but it's going to require a political component to help with the political issues as well.
Thank you for that. And what we're now going to do, everyone on the calls, we're going to transition to the Q&A portion of the conversation. So we've got about 20 minutes to do a Q&A with all of you before we will transition back to IDC's president. So this is the time now for call participation. I know I have a text message here from a good friend in Lebanon, Alan Dargam from MTV Lebanon. He's asking, this is probably a question that would be better for Samah to answer. The question is the U.S. willing to add more aid to Lebanon during the current crisis that Lebanon is facing?
Thank you for the question. I wish I would be the person that would decide, but that's way above my pay grade. Those are discussions that, as many of you know, those are discussions that come between Congress and the White House and the State Department. We're the last ones at the receiving end of that. So it depends on the policy, it depends on the conditions on the ground. We're there to serve. USAID usually take the orders and march in. So I can't answer that question because that's way above my pay grade.
Thank you, Samah and Alan. Will definitely be following up with you on this issue because it is for sure a priority for IDC to ensure that Lebanon is getting the support that it needs. The next question I actually have is, it's a very interesting question actually. It's from Tom Abraham, and the question is, what is the effect on the push of female empowerment with the local tribal leaders, and how does that affect other programs trying to get pushed in the local community? So I think this is a great question for Rana to answer.
That's a good question. I still think we have a long way to go. Sometimes people will prop up a woman just because they think it's the right thing to do without actually giving her that real empowerment, that real role. So I think that it's really important to work through jobs to do that. When the women are in roles that are, like for example, with the solar program, we have 2 female engineers. They're very intelligent, and they are equal leaders with the male engineers. And even in America and around the world, female engineers are a minority, you know, compared to male engineers. So that's really impressive. It's really amazing. They speak multiple language. They're giving lectures. They're going to meetings. That's really where I think it's going to happen in the workplace. So I think that the political area, it's just not our area, so I can't really talk on it as confidently. But I can tell you from the humanitarian perspective, the economic perspective, empowering women in the workplace by giving them actual roles is essential.
Thank you. Next question we have is actually from Chicago, Dr. Kamal Ibrahim. His question is from Mrs. Norquist. Can you provide an update at all on any efforts that USAID has going on with regard to Egypt and the Coptic community?
Thank you for the question. So we continue engaging on that regards in Egypt. Egypt is a very interesting place for us. We understand that there are some challenges, particularly in the Upper Egypt, of communities that are targeted because of their faith. We work very closely with the Egyptian government. As many of you know, that President Sisi has been on the forefront on changing a lot of the relationships and the positions and policies on the ground in Egypt. For example, the changing of the permissions and licenses for building churches in 2016. That was a big thing to change. His appointment of Christian governors in very conservative areas sent us a very strong message for the Egyptian people that he considers everyone as citizens of Egypt. Nevertheless, USAID works in some of those areas that works on cultural preservation, youth empowerment, women empowerment, girls empowerment, that we try to address some of those community tensions, particularly when it comes to between Christians and Muslims. We like to do more work, but as the political and economic situation on the ground allow us to do, we would love to explore more opportunities to do so.
Thank you, thank you. And obviously, as Dr. Ibrahim knows, IDC is working very hard. In particular, we're looking at Minya province, which is the epicenter of a lot of incidents that I think Mrs. Norquist was referencing. And again, just an advisory for people who are on the call, if you could, again, just please put your questions in the chat box. I see some people have their hands raised. Just because we have so many people on the call, we want to avoid noise interference. So again, if you could just use the Q&A box, we'll make sure and try and get to your questions. I think this is a good question for Rana Abro. It's from Rain Henna. And her question is, can you comment on how ongoing security challenges have hindered redevelopment efforts in return?
Hi, Rain. I know her. Security is absolutely essential to all of our work. Our work, USAID's work, every humanitarian organization's work. So much money is being invested, so much time and energy and volunteer time into this region to develop it, to fix it. What happens if a situation happened again with ISIS and everything was destroyed, literally destroyed with bulldozers and hammers? So the security situation really needs to be focused on by the people in those fields, such as, Assyrian Policy Institute is where Rain's from. She produces, with her team, excellent reports on the security situation. Just like we're on the ground with the humanitarian work and we know what's going on in individual villages, that's how Assyrian Policy Institute is in the political arena. So that's really important to understand as well. And so we need, and also, I also want to take a second to thank In Defense of Christians and the other organizations that are doing this policy work in DC as well on our behalf, because we're not there. You guys are the reason that we're getting this attention and aid, because your voice is there in DC speaking regularly, daily, and doing things like this. So all of these are, yelling, shouting, whatever we're doing, trying to get attention is really, really important, because US support is extremely valuable. It's extremely valuable. They have a huge impact and influence on the region. They can impact the Kurdish region. They can impact the government of Iraq. If the United States takes a stronger role in the political situation, things can change. We can get security. We can improve. We have a ton of factions, each controlling a different checkpoint, which is like a mile. Like a mile, 1 mile is another military group, another mile is another military group. When you go to Iraq and you're going from village to village and you're, let's say, with a group, they stop you at each one and check who you are. If you're within the same military group, you would not have to do that. They would be communicating with each other. Everything would be clear. And I understand security, it's essential. These checkpoints are important. We don't want invaders to come into these villages, but it's really broken. It needs help. Our work is very threatened. Specifically, there's a Christian group called the Nineveh Plains Protection Unit, and they are doing an amazing job. Everywhere that they are is the highest rate of return of displaced people. It's a fact. It's just a fact. Wherever they are, there's a higher rate of return. It's not even disputable. So they should be empowered. They're doing a good job. Other military groups are not doing a good job. There's a low rate of return. There's instability and insecurity. They should not be empowered. It seems simple, but we need stronger support behind us to improve these things.
Absolutely. And certainly just to add to that, I know we do have, I think, a couple of reporters on the call. So on the congressional side, certainly if you're looking for more information on returns, Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, Congresswoman Anna Eshoo would be two members of Congress to go to. They're really leading the charge for this on the Hill. I've also gotten a couple of questions. I think both of you can answer this, but just questions about healthcare challenges for Christian communities, and particularly with a focus on Syria and Iraq. And I think this is obviously very timely given the pandemic. So Samah, would you care to be able to address that first, and then we'll go back to Rana?
Sure. So USAID has a number of health programs across the region, and in many areas of Iraq and northern Iraq as well. The good news is, as we mentioned, we have 6 partners for NPI. 5 of them actually have been able to continue doing their work despite the COVID challenges that we're going through right now. So we're very proud of partnering with them and their due diligence to continue doing their work. Most of them have gone virtual and online, whether it's through working and training the solar engineers, or developing like the Shlama ones that they do, or allowing those engineers to build solar panels in their homes, or other partners that have been able to do a lot of their trainings, whether it's business incubators or computer literacy, have all gone virtual. So there are ways that we were able, while even working with our partners, even the new ones like the NPI partners, we were able to go over some of the health programs that challenges that we have right now because of COVID. But also, I would encourage everyone to go to our programs in our website, usaid.gov, and look at some of the health programs that we do across the region, in the Nineveh Plains and other areas in Iraq, as well as across the region.
Thank you. And Rana, would you like to add anything onto healthcare challenges that the communities are currently experiencing?
We don't have any health programs going on right now with Shlama, but I can tell you locally within the villages, there is a bit of fear with COVID growing because there isn't adequate healthcare. There is not, every village doesn't have a medical clinic. It doesn't have to be a hospital for a small village. They don't all have doctors either, because something that happened with ISIS is that a brain drain. The first people that were given a pass to leave the country was doctors, attorneys, educators, all of the people that were professionals that had a strong record. Those were the people that left first. So there is a definite medical care shortage. I mean, right now Iraq's still under lockdown for COVID, and it might be longer because every case there, imagine it being like 1,000 people here, because they just don't have the medical capacity. That's not a scientific calculated number.
Well, thank you. And I think we're at the point of our video call here where we do kind of want to transition just to concluding thoughts. And so I actually wanted to invite first Samah, second Rana, and then lastly Toufic to provide any just concluding thoughts with everybody who's watching. So without further ado, Samah, would you like to share any concluding thoughts from your side?
Sure. First, let me thank Toufic and IDC and you, Stephen, for a really, really great discussion and opportunity for us to sit and talk to you and your supporters and friends out there. Look, as I said earlier, it's not perfect picture. There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of different ways of doing business that we need to do. We've had some criticism. Why are you focusing on the Christians in the Middle East? Well, the fact is, since 2003, the United States have provided billions and billions of dollars to support the Iraqi people, whether it's in the health sector, or whether it's in the finance sector, or whether in the educational sector, or in the humanitarian sector. So the focus on northern Iraq is not something new for the United States to do. Those are communities that were victims of genocide. They were targeted because of their faith. It's not because randomly, but their homes were desecrated, their church were destroyed, their way of life has changed forever. So every little thing that the United States could do, we will keep doing. And hopefully we can do more. But I also want to add one more thing to the point that was raised about the role of governments. This is not a fight just for the United States. The governments in the Middle East need to become accountable, transparent to their own citizens, because that's the path forward. We might be able to continue doing some development work, and we might not at one point, right? Everything, the whole economy of the world, the COVID challenges, everything is changing. So as we saw before COVID, the youth in countries like Lebanon and in Iraq have risen, demanding more accountability despite the religious differences. They all saw themselves as Iraqis. They all saw themselves as Lebanese. They all saw themselves as Jordanians or Moroccans or Algerians. So it's time for countries and regimes to take responsibility and accountability towards their own citizens. And the United States will always partner with governments that does so, and with local and faith-based organizations that fight for their own communities. Thank you.
Well, we really appreciate that. And again, thank you for your service to the U.S. and all the work that you're doing to preserve these historic communities in the Middle East. Rana, would you care to share any concluding thoughts from your end?
I just want to say that it has been a great privilege to even be in this webinar with Ms. Samah Norquist, and just hearing her words, I just think that's so incredibly important that these new governments transform, and sooner rather than later. The transformation feels slow. That's why the young people are so mad. They're like, oh yeah, things will change, and then it doesn't. And it takes years and years, and so they're angry. So they just want accountability and transparency, like she's saying. They want change when they don't have regular electricity. They're using generators, interrupted electricity. Again, why we're doing the solar project is the most minimal services that the country should be able to afford are not adequately provided. So yeah, the country needs to step up. The different regions need to step up. I think it's so uplifting to be able to work together. I want to grow that. I want to reach that point. We're hungry. We want to work more. We want to build more. We want to create a prosperous, thriving region. But it's going to take a lot of work, and we want to work with others. We're partnering with USAID's partners. The partners are partnering. So it's a really cool effort if we can be positive and work together, and the governments can all, step up to the plate and make things better. So thank you again for this opportunity. It's been such a pleasure, and I just look forward to the future.
Well, again, thank you for joining us, Rana. And again, we want to just commend you for your work and helping just preserve this historic community that's recovering from genocide, and hopefully helping set it on a trajectory to be able to not only be sustained, but to grow and to thrive and to prosper in the future. So thank you. And then lastly, just to provide some wrap-up thoughts, some concluding thoughts, I want to invite our IDC's president, Toufic Baaklini, back to share his thoughts. So Toufic, if you could kindly just unmute yourself, or if perhaps Sarah could help. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I want to specifically thank my friend Samah. Since you started with Usaid, they've gone a long way in helping and supporting our people in the Middle East. So I want to thank you for this. We've gone a long way, a lot of improvements, and I know you had a lot to do with this. So I want to thank you on behalf of our people in the Middle East. What I wanted to talk about also is we spoke about security. We will keep our work and securing our people in the whole region. We'll keep working with the Trump administration to pressuring President Sisi on the security situation. And we will continue also to work on the security in Iraq. It's improving in north Iraq. And we have a new elected government, and they're starting to do a good job. But we will work to have local people secure, like the NBU and others in that region. And we also will continue to work on Syria and the Turkish invasion in northeastern Syria. It's a problem, but we will also continue to work on that and work with our partners. As for Lebanon, and I've heard the question from Alain Darham from NTV. Lebanon is also a priority, as are the Christians in the Middle East. It's a priority for President Trump, priority for Vice President Pence, and Secretary Pompeo. And we were working for Congress to increase the aid, and we're working with USAID help on the new program initiatives, NPI in Lebanon. And we will continue to work on this. We are the voice of the voiceless. We are here to help our brothers and sisters in the Middle East. And USAID has, and of course the administration and USAID have played a major role in keeping our people in their homeland. So I want to here thank again the acting administrator Barsa and Samah, of course, and Rana, Abro for participating in this webinar. So thank you all. We're always here, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your participation, and we look forward to continuing this really important work in the Middle East. And again, we just want to extend our gratitude to everyone for tuning in online as well. So thank you, everyone, and I hope that you all have a great day.
Thank you.